If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. What's the creepiest, most unexplainable thing you've ever seen that you haven't shared anywhere? When I was a little girl, I was playing in my room one morning with my sister. I looked out my window and saw a man staring in at us. I told my sister to leave my room and ran to get my father. He didn't believe me and thought I was crazy. Needless to say, I had an awful hard time sleeping that night. Throughout my childhood, I'd hear what sounded like footsteps outside at night or my parents' car doors opening long after they had gone to sleep. Several years later, I looked at our house on maps. I always assumed we lived by ourselves in the woods, far from anyone else. It turns out there was a small house that looked like it was being lived in only a few hundred yards in the woods from us. My family was less skeptical of my crazy stories after I showed them that. When I was a teenager, I was at a friend's house when his parents and family were not home. I was on his back porch tying my shoes, then I went back into his house. Tying my shoes is a 20-second action. No. I walk inside, and his entire family is back home. They're sitting at the kitchen table eating dinner, and they ask me what I am doing here. They're staring at me like I'm crazy and asking why I just walked into their house. I ask for the time, and they tell me it is 6:30 p.m. I lost an entire hour doing a 20-second action. To this day, I still have no clue what happened or where the time went. This is my dad's story, not mine. In the 80s, my dad was in the Peace Corps and lived in Sierra Leone for 3 years. He had a motorcycle, or some sort of motorbike, at least at one point, and would ride around the roads when he had free time. One day he's riding a dirt road that snakes around a small mountainside or hillside past some construction works. About half a mile after the road work, he sees a man on the side of this dirt road on the mountain or hillside, just laughing his butt off. And he was blue. Not like painted blue, but blue. At first, my dad rode on, thinking nothing of it. And then it sank in, that he saw a blue dude sitting on the side of a dirt road, laughing wildly. He turned around and rode back to where he saw the blue dude, and there was nothing there. He kept retracing his path beyond the roadwork and never saw the blue guy again. Later that day, he went back to the village he was living in at the time and told the locals about what he had seen. The locals all laughed and said, essentially, no, you didn't. White men can't see devils. I got lost on state land behind a park near my house growing up. There was a trail. I just wandered off and lost my way, being a dumb kid. I was in there for what seemed like forever and started to get nervous because I couldn't find the trail again. Right before I started to panic about being lost, I noticed a man in a flannel not far away kneeling down. I started to approach him. His back was turned, but he looked like he was rummaging around on the ground. I was about 25 yards away when he stood up suddenly. He was holding a decapitated deer head by the antlers. The deer's body was on the ground beside him. I freaked out and dove behind a tree. I heard him moving around a little longer. Then silence. I ran straight north after that, in the direction of the park, forgetting the trail. I fought my way through the woods and found the park again. My dad said I was gone in less than an hour. I told him what I saw, and he explained that the guy in the flannel probably just wanted to rack off a dead buck. No big deal. It still freaked me out, though. My sister and I were staying at my grandparents' house one night when I saw a person outside my grandparents' house one night walking up and down the area. It looked like my grandparents' house. The next day, I jokingly told my grandparents that the neighbor was taking a midnight walk last night. My grandparents exchanged a weird look and then told me that my neighbor had died a week ago. My sister looked scared. Later, she told me that she had spoken to that neighbor last night because she was asking for directions to the nearest gas station. My grandparents and that neighbor were friends, but all of a sudden, my grandparents stood talking to her. The neighbor had told my grandparents that she lived alone, grew up in an orphanage, and was into a lot of witchcraft. The neighbor died of a heart attack. I asked my grandparents if they had seen the body, and they told me they had at the funeral. When I was 4, I saw something I couldn't explain. I was sleeping in between my parents and their giant bed. I woke up just before sunrise, and there was something standing at the window looking out into the front yard and at the road. I sat up and just looked at it. It was a tall thing, and as I thought about it later, because I can still picture it so clearly, it had its hands held behind its back like it was deep in thought. Then it seemed to sense me and turned to look at me. Hoo boy, I'll never forget that. It had yellowish white skin, a bald head, and an extremely long face that stretched down to its upper chest. Giant eyes and small patches of short hair around its face, like it tried to shave but didn't know how. I realized years later that the look it gave me indicated it was afraid. It had a brown, woolly-looking robe on. It locked eyes with me and kept looking at me as it floated around the bed and out the bedroom door. As soon as it was out of the room, the door slammed, the lights turned on their own, and both of my parents shot up on either side of me, breathing heavy like they'd just woken up from a nightmare. I need to ask my mom if she remembers this, because, goddamn, I do. Whatever that thing was, I know a few things. Number 1, it wasn't sleep paralysis. I could move freely the whole time. Number 2, I didn't feel threatened by it. I felt uneasy because it was a thing I wasn't used to and didn't recognize, but I didn't feel like this thing wants to kill me or anything. I feel some kind of compassion for it today after seeing its face. I used to think it was some kind of demon because it looked like something you would probably equate with one. Vaguely human, but also clearly wasn't. Today, I choose to think it was a glitch in reality. It was something that lived somewhere else and somehow ended up in our world for a short time. It seemed more scared of me than I was of it. When I was about 8 or so, my family went up to a campsite near a lake. We went with several other families, and they brought their kids too. One thing me and this one kid would do is search the shallow areas for crawdads. As I was searching, I began to venture a ways out until the water was up to my waist. The water wasn't too clear, but it also wasn't muddy, and I could see the pale area of the shallows and the darker area where the water dropped off, but I didn't know that at the time. I ended up stepping into the darker, deeper water and began to fall in. Before I could, a pale, slender arm grabbed my leg and pushed me back to the shallows. All I saw was the arm as it sank back into the deeper water before I skittered back to the shore. I remember it as clear as day, but nothing has ever turned up from that lake, no bodies, no drownings, nothing. My parents still think I made it up. I was young, and digital cameras were a new thing. I was obsessed with them, and my mom would buy me a camera. We'd try it and see if we liked it, and if it was shitty, we'd take it back. We purchased a cheap one. The indoor pictures had a red and yellow hue. It had long exposure, so a lot of the time there were streaks and weird stuff. I took a picture of my room one day and plugged it up to the computer to view the picture. There was a full-blown man wearing sweatpants and a sweatshirt with a hat. There were also light streaks in the picture, but he clearly looked different from the imperfections, like there was a man actually there in mid-walking motion. I called my mom right before commenting on this to ask if she remembered that. She said she didn't really. I don't believe her because the camera immediately disappeared after this event, and she never got me another. When I think about it now that I'm in my late 20s, it still makes tears come to my eyes because the house I grew up in was so scary and weird. I've never felt like that in any other home. Something was off. I used to live in really rural Texas and was driving down a farm to market, road during some very thick fog. I was in an old pickup truck and was going maybe 20 to 30 miles per hour because I couldn't see very far ahead. Super glad I was. As I came around a turn, I saw through the fog this big, hulking figure lurching across the road. I slowed down, pulled up near it to pass, and saw what was the biggest hog I've ever seen in my life. A good 400 pounds, certainly. It was dead, probably destroyed by whatever car hit it, and dragging it to the side of the road was an absolutely massive white shaggy dog. Y'all love this dog. I was in a pickup truck, and this dog made eye contact with me, lifted its head, and stared me level in the eye for what felt like an eternity. I stopped my truck and stared. I was so caught off guard. After probably a few seconds, it felt like forever, it put its head back down, grabbed a chunk of hog, and continued making its way off the road. To break it down, this dog was smart enough to move the animal it wanted to eat, large and strong enough to drag a 400-ish pound hog across pavement, and tall enough to look me in the eye in a pickup. I will never forget those eyes. It had mud-stained white fur, a big block head, and a long wolfy tail. It looked almost like a Pyrenees, common around there, but with a big Saint Bernard-shaped head and double the normal size. Big, glowing yellow eyes. I have no idea if it was some freak mutant farm dog, a spirit, a wolf, or what, but I'd like to never see it again. I used to live in the middle of nowhere. The town had less than 200 people in it. I used to work through the night in one of the metro areas, and it was about a 40-minute drive with about 15 of them on a county road. I used to think I would see shit in the fields, coyotes, deer, etc., all the time. I never thought twice. Well, one morning I was on my way home, about 3 a.m., and we had a little bridge to cross right before we got to our road. As I'm closing in on crossing the bridge, I can see something pearl white just hanging out in the middle of the road. I thought it was probably a swan, and it would move. As I got closer, I realized that swans are not that big. I was in a F-150, and it was at eye level with me. When its wings opened up, it literally covered both lanes of traffic. I swerved to miss it, but I hit some of the wing. I slammed on my brakes and turned around. Whatever it was 100% gone without a trace. I never saw it again. If it was a bird, that's the ducking biggest bird I have ever seen. Oh, and I did not live by anything considered to be a large body of water. I was working in a retail store in a pretty sketchy area. There was this lady who was obviously a heavy drug user or ex-drug user. She must have been in her 50s or 60s. She was notorious on my block for being crazy, but she'd visit me all the time and tell me she thought I was cute. It was really bizarre because she looked like a crackhead, but she'd act like a teenage girl around me. I tried to be nice to her because she was known for being volatile. Anyway, on Christmas Eve, she packed an entire Christmas dinner, which she told me was all home-cooked Guyanese food and a cologne set. As she was leaving, she just squatted down on the floor, threw her hand up, and started cackling. Yes, cackling, which faded to a giggle. I never saw her again. When I was a kid, 10 to 11 years old, I awoke in the middle of an autumn night and looked out my window. There, just 20 to 30 feet away from me, were two spherical balls of light dancing around each other. They seemed to float in mid-air. I assured myself I was awake, and I was. They bounced around for a while, then disappeared slowly, like a light dimming. It was ducking weird. When I was 10, I went with my parents to this campground so they could visit their friends. They had a son who I got along with at the same age. Sometimes, however, if there were other kids around, the son would try to pick on me to impress them. Me and the son went fishing, and right as we're about to leave, another kid comes and joins us, and the son immediately starts picking on me. Not wanting to be stuck on a boat and teased, I decided to leave and walk back to the campground by myself. I didn't want to go straight back to my parents because they'd ask why I wasn't with the son, and I didn't want to get into it. So I just walked on this U-shaped road. In the center of the park are campers, and on the other side are woods with a lake around them. At the very center of the city is a park. Perfect. I think I'll just sit on the swings until I think enough time has passed to go back. As I'm on the swings, I notice a path directly across from me. I get up and start walking along this dirt path. There are reeds on either side of me, and I have my hands stretched out as I walk in the dead center of this path. My hands can just barely touch these reeds unless I move closer to one side. I walk for about 10 minutes, maybe, and I get to this pond. Crystal clear water, and I have this urge to drink it. It looks so refreshing. I kneel down, and suddenly the hairs on the back of my neck go straight up. It was like I snapped back into myself. What am I doing? Why am I about to drink pond water? Why did I walk down this path? I start feeling really uneasy, so I turn around and start walking the same way I came. Let me clarify. There was only one path. Straight. I made no turns, I didn't walk around this pond. I simply walked to the end of the path, got freaked out about something, and turned around. Suddenly, all types of bugs were around. I kept walking, and I noticed the dirt path was getting more and more narrow. The reeds and tall grass are now in my arms, and there's a constant buzzing feeling in my ears from these bugs. The path gets so narrow that I have to walk sideways to avoid the reeds. I yell out for help, and I hear a voice ask if I'm okay. I reply, I'm lost, and a woman says, just walk straight, honey, I see you. I see nothing, it's just tall grass and reeds. I walk a few feet and see the road. I am scratched from head to toe, and there's a woman by the playground asking what happened. She takes a Kleenex out of her pocketbook and starts wiping some of the scratches, and I tell her what happened. I look behind me and see no path. I'm at the same park. I'm in front of the swing I was just on. The woman looks at me and tells me that I shouldn't even think about it and to just forget it happened because I'm fine now. But she really emphasized not talking about it. I've always been on the fence about it. I'm sure there was one path in and one path out. The bugs could have steered me off course. Maybe I am being paranoid? Or, something more sinister that nearly trapped me for good. One time, me and two other friends from Miami went home to my home in Kansas to visit my grandmother because she wasn't doing well. She later passed away that month, and one night, me and my friend went out on a drive while my other friend stayed with my grandma to check on her every once in a while. Anyway, me and my friend went out to go find, I don't remember exactly what, so I'm just going to say a random product, milk. We had taken the wrong turn, and this part almost seemed like, out of a movie, our radio had stopped working. It was like maybe 10 p.m. out there, so currently, we are in the middle of a random dirt road and almost nowhere in Kansas. Me and my friend get out of the car to see our surroundings because there wasn't any service, and about 5 minutes outside of our car, we see a very large deer jumping around in the field to our right. I get my buddy to look at the deer, and he sees it too. It was maybe 50 yards away from us. About half a football field. The deer has seen us, too. It all goes silent. The large deer starts to let this super loud scream that almost sounds like a ducking elk but is a lot more human-like go on for about 15 seconds, and in the middle of it, he starts to stand up on his two legs and starts to run at us. We get back in the car so quick and drive away as fast as we can, as fast as our car can go. I remember distinctly that sometime in the middle of our panic, our radio starts to come on, and it's playing a Ward tour by a tribe called Quest. That was one of my favorite songs, but now I can't listen to it without remembering that scene. When I came straight home, I pulled my friend to the side, and me and my other friend told him the story of what had happened, and throughout the whole time, he thought that we were bullying him. I think by some point, he started to believe the story, but it was by far the creepiest I have ever experienced. When I was 7, we had just moved into a house after having lived in an apartment before that. I was beyond happy. We had a big backyard and about an acre of woods after that. Perfect for a kid to run around and explore. Anyway, Christmas Eve was held at our house, and we had a full house. It was incredibly cold, so all the kids were kept inside, which was fine because we had games and all of those glorious 70s TV Christmas specials. It was about 11 p.m. when everyone had left, and I was in bed, trying to fall asleep, but hey, good luck with that kid. About an hour later, when everyone was asleep except me, I heard a faint crunching noise outside. Then I realized it was slowly getting louder. I was starting to freak out when a shadow appeared in my window. It was a bright moon that night, reflecting off the 4 to 6 inches of snow. I looked at it, against all of my instincts. I swear I saw a giant humanoid figure with horns. Like a massive dude, almost filling the window. At that point, I don't know how else to describe what I felt except by saying it was like an acceptance of pure dread and terror. Then the shadow seemingly evaporated. That's when I jumped out of bed, screaming, and ran to my parents' room. They were already up, having heard my screams. My dad grabbed his hunting rifle and ran outside. My mom and I looked outside their window. We saw my dad yelling at the woods, gun raised. I saw a set of tracks that led right up to my bedroom window. The end just ended. My dad, who was a seasoned hunter, later told us the tracks just ended and whoever it was didn't backtrack. I've never seen my dad scared before, nor ever again. He was a vet and an all-around fearless kind of guy. We never figured out what happened that night. It never happened again, thankfully. That's not the creepy part, though. I had dreamt of this exact encounter for the previous 2 years, down to my dad outside with his rifle. When I was 15, my family and I went to visit Peru. We were walking through an open market stall single file. I was second behind my dad, about 5 feet apart from each other when we passed 2 men walking in the opposite direction. Both were tall and thin, one had a halo of black curly hair, and the other was blonde. They were both smiling and seemed pleasant enough, but the hairs on the back of my neck and arms stood up, and I felt absolute, complete fear. That word doesn't really cover it. I felt I was about to get gutted by a predator. A few seconds after they pass, my dad turns to look at me, and he is white as a sheet and looks petrified. I turned around to look at my sister, then at my mom. They were the same. We all had the same reaction to these seemingly benign-looking men. My hands shook on and off for the whole day. I'm getting very uncomfortable just remembering this, and it's been 30 years. I was driving through the rural South with my so. Only one car is in front of us. A Volvo? I remember it having that old blue color. A winding road in the Appalachian Mountains, the kind where, if you don't slow down, off the edge of the mountain you go. There's a sharp turn. We expect it because we've done this route so many times before. The car in front of us slams into it at an angle, his left nose looking like it's going to be ducked up. I see pieces and fragments of it falling off. Instead of stopping, he keeps driving. Weird. 10 minutes later, we get off the last mountain and onto a decently major highway. There are plenty of exits, the car still doesn't get off. We start to pass cars using the left passing lane. And lo and behold, the car is spotless. There was no sign of the damage. Not even a scratch. We had both literally seen actual pieces flying off this car, and there is absolutely no sign of damage. Also, immediately after we pass him, the guy quickly gets off the highway. He was wearing what looked like an Indiana Jones type hat, and you couldn't see his face. But he noticeably hunkered down after seeing us notice him. It was the strangest thing. I almost feel like it was some glitch I wasn't supposed to see, but I'm not saying it was. I believe in science and not glitches, but dang. It's been years, and we still talk about it. Creepy things happen in those mountains. I was reading that the Appalachians used to be connected to the Scottish Highlands millions of years ago. It makes sense to me. I had also met a no-nonsense oil tanker guy who swore he had seen a Sasquatch in West Virginia. Of course, it was West Virginia. I am a forest ranger and hunt averagely. I live in the Netherlands and was on a hunting trip in Germany. Now I am a Germanic pagan, which means that I believe in the old gods and even some of the fearful creatures that come out at night for them to hunt. This was day 3 of what was supposed to be a hunting trip off a week. Things were going well. I had seen a lot of game in the past 3 days and had been tracking a deer since day 2 by that time. Anyway, it was night, and I had set up a tent in the woods. This would normally be illegal, but I had an agreement with the owner of the forest since he was a relative of mine. I was sleeping when I was suddenly woken up by a weird sound in the woods. I originally thought it was an animal, but I had no knowledge of one making a sound like this. It was about 2 in the morning, and I thought nothing much of it, so I tried going back to sleep, with my knife a little closer than before. I failed to go back to sleep because the weird sound had me in its grasp. There was something about it that was so interesting to me. It was kind of a low, burling sound, like you would hear from a male deer during mating season. The problem was that it wasn't mating season. The sound also had a strange, high-pitched tone and a sort of growl at the same time to it that a deer would not be able to make. Interested in what was out there, I grabbed my rifle and knife and went to take a look outside. The sound was back again. I now walked in the distance of the sound with a healthy bit of fear of the unknown. I got closer and closer to the sound when I suddenly stepped into the water. There was a pool in front of me. A bit irritated that I got my socks wet over my own imagination, I decided that it was in my head and that I should go back to my tent. But then I saw a glimpse of something at the edge of the water on the other side of the pool. It was something that looked like a mix between a big black wolf-like creature and a kind of deer, since I thought I had seen that it had antlers. I couldn't see it clearly because it was almost pitch black, but I went back straight away. Not even shooting at it. I couldn't sleep the entire night thinking about what I had heard and seen. I started thinking about the creatures that I had read about and thought they might be shockers. A type of shapeshifter in German mythology. But at the end of the night, I came to the conclusion that I should continue hunting. I shot a deer 2 days later and went home. I was not forgetting what I had seen in the night since it gave me a good fright. But mostly because there are way more dangerous creatures than those in the woods, if you believe in folklore or mythology. When I was 16 or so, living with my mom, normal stuff, I had 2 dogs, Bernese, huge lazy floofs, and I would take them for a walk every night before bed, usually around 9 to 11 p.m. on school nights, depending on what I was doing, etc. One night I'm in our backyard, which was about half an acre of open lawn, walking the dogs, and at the edge of where our backyard met the tree line, which extended into another acre of thick trees, I see a tiny light in the woods fairly far in. To paint a picture, it's dark in northern New York in summer, the stars are fairly illuminating, middle of nowhere, and at the edge of our cleared property, I see what appears to be a candlelight fairly far into the woods. I stare at it for a few minutes, weighing my options, like, am I high or tired? Is there someone on the property? What the duck? And here's where it gets weird. After literally going through those options in my head, I lose complete track of time and memory of the occasion and come to my senses. Both dogs are asleep on the ground. I look at my iPod, and it's 3 a.m. I'd been outside, standing in the same spot, from what must have been 10 p.m. to 5 hours later. I wasn't tired, and I don't think I fell asleep standing up because I had a coherent thought process before whatever happened. The light was gone, I roused the dogs, went inside, and couldn't get to sleep. I was about 16 or 17 years old, I'm 34 now. I and my friends used to think it was really cool to hang out in graveyards together. We were stupid, so we agreed one morning to meet up about 6 a.m. in the graveyard and just hang for a while. We had done this several times previously, always basically deserting except for a mourner once in a while. So I ride my bike into the graveyard. There are only 2 entrances to this place, and they're about 30 yards away from each other. I'm sitting in the middle of a fairly big graveyard, just looking around, waiting for my friend. I'm sitting there in dead silence for about 15 minutes, just enjoying the quiet, when suddenly a guy dressed from head to toe in all black walks into the graveyard. He has a hoodie on over his face, but I figure he's just in mourning or something. He walks over to a gravestone with his back to me. I assume he didn't see me when he walked in. He stares at the grave for about 10 seconds, then goes to the grave right beside it, does the same thing, goes to the next grave, and keeps doing this. I start to get weirded out now, so I quickly get on my bicycle, and then I kick up the kickstand, which makes a loud noise. He spins around, and I can see he is wearing a balaclava on his face. Now I'm really scared. I start riding towards the exit, and the dude starts spraying at me at a fast clip. I have to literally ride through graves to get away from this guy because if I'd stayed on the path, he would have gotten to me. I make it out of the graveyard and am pedaling very fast away from the place. I get about 30 seconds of pedaling in and look backward at the graveyard. The dude is still running towards me down the road, even though he has no hope of really catching me at this point. I'll never forget seeing him run after me like something out of the Terminator film. I told my friends, and we all decided never to go near that place again. It was terrifying, and I still think about it from time to time, wondering what that dude could have possibly been doing. We had a few-day-old new baby who was very jaundiced and crying a lot. We were taking him to his pediatrician daily. After 3 hard screaming days and nights, he finally fell asleep in my arms in the night, but he wasn't drinking or wetting. I was exhausted and rocked him in my arms for a few hours while he slept, and my husband finally got some sleep in our bedroom. At dawn, I hear barking in our backyard. We lived on a hill, and our backyard was cut out of the hill behind us, with huge retaining walls on 3 sides and a 6-foot gate. We had a German Shepherd known for escaping, but not from this yard. I went outside to investigate the barking. There was a large, fluffy black dog in our backyard who stopped barking when I came out. I was confused about how he got in the backyard and had never seen the black dog before. I woke my husband and asked him to get this dog out of the yard. I had the baby in my arms, so I didn't want to do it myself. The husband is groggy, confused as to what I was asking him. He went to the backyard with our shepherd, and came back in. There was no black dog. Am I sure I saw a dog? Yes. Saw and heard. I checked, and no black dog. The gate was locked. As the husband was tired but awake, something in me woke up, and I told him that I was worried about the baby. Since you're up, why don't we take the baby to the emergency room? Our son was admitted, and stayed for 5 weeks, having 3 different operations during his stay. Long story short. Unknown genetic condition. The doctor said that we got our son in just in time. He wasn't crying because he had given up and was in the process of dying. If we had waited any longer, he would have died in my arms that morning, at any moment. I swear, I saw and heard that black dog. I remember him as clear as day. I'm not sure if he was an angel or death, but I am forever grateful. I grew up in a pretty rural area of the United States on a decent-sized corn and soybean farm that is about half farmland and half forest. Naturally, my friends and I really enjoyed goofing off in the woods as kids right up until we all left for college or other post-high school endeavors. The land is kind of rolling hills, but nothing crazy, and most of the land in every direction we had thoroughly explored. There really weren't many nooks or crannies left, but hands down, the creepiest thing that ever happened was when I was out in the woods alone, of course, on a bright, sunny August day. Now the forest behind the farm had an almost bowl-shaped topography to it, in that the middle was a depression that for most of the year was a swamp, which was very difficult to get through. Like I said though, I'd seen just about everything for a good distance into those woods, including this cool old blue car from the 1940s. It was some kind of Studebaker, that had been parked by the edge of the swamp at one point long ago. However, the borders of the swamp had shifted many times, and on this particular day the car was sitting in swamp water almost up to its windows. This wasn't anything new, but what was new was the man. Woman? Ike. Sitting in the driver's seat. Whoever they were, they had long, dirty blonde hair with colorful but dirty streaks, almost like they were painted in. The best way I could describe it would be like if a girl painted her hair like an old-times clown and then fell in a mud puddle. Of course, this freaked me the duck out as soon as I saw it, heart pounding, adrenaline pumping, the whole 9 yards. I was facing the driver's side of the car, and while I was scared SHT initially, I scrambled to the left towards, and somewhat away from, the front of the car to put some distance between me and the car, but I didn't outright bolt. Again, it was a bright, sunny, beautiful summer day. There is nothing to be too afraid of. I mean, I thought I was pretty confident in my youth that I could outrun whatever was in that car. I peeked around the corner of a tree, and with my new vantage point, it was immediately clear that it was just some old JCPenney mannequin with a wig on. Still creepy as duck as it hadn't been there ever before, but I had to admit whoever put it there had got me. Then it turned its head, and those pupilless, cold eyes looked right at me. Long story short, I Usain bolted all the way back to my house and locked everything down like Fort Knox. A few weeks later, after my friends told me I was full of shit, we went back to the car, again in the daylight, and it was still there. Numbers breed courage, I guess, and we went right up to the car and looked inside. It was definitely just a dummy, and it had some kind of MacGyver's fishing line contraption that one could crudely control the dummy head with. The line ran out the other side of the car and around the back of a tree, a little ways into the swamp. Someone was there that day, and they knew I was looking at the car. I once had a dream. I was walking solo down a familiar dirt path towards a wooded area. Side note, the path felt familiar to me in the dream. I had never been down this path before. As I walked towards the wooded area, the feeling of familiarity changed, and the path ended at an old abandoned cemetery under the tree canopy. The familiarity suggested the path continued and the cemetery should not be there. I was drawn into the cemetery towards a specific grave. The detail was vivid. There was an old stone bench next to a sunken grave. The headstone had an angel on top. The remaining wing had a pine needle dangling off, hanging from a cobweb, drifting in the breeze. It was peaceful and quiet. I immediately woke up and felt like the dream was calling me back. I felt oddly connected. The jolt from waking up was so startling that I decided to write the dream down. Fast forward a couple of years. I was considering buying a house with my girlfriend. After we reached a house we were considering, the realtor called and said she was running late. While waiting, we walked outside the house. Behind the house, we noticed a path past the overgrown grass going into some woods. To kill time, we decided to walk the path to the trees. While walking along and enjoying the sun on my face, I was hit with an intense feeling of déjà vu. I knew this place. As we reached the woods, there it was, the abandoned cemetery. It was the same cemetery in my dream. I told my girlfriend I'd visited this place in a dream and described specific details, down to the pine needle. She thought I was trying to pull a stupid prank until she saw the sunken grave, missing wing and stone bench, and even the pine needle hanging off the angel's wing. She immediately walked back towards our car. The entire experience was a copy and paste of my dream, with the exception of my girlfriend being present. Later that day, we were back at my house. She asked me how I knew all that detail. I let her read the dream I wrote down. I described the path, trees, cemetery, and weather perfectly. She refused to ever talk about the experience again. That was around 20 years ago. The experience still haunts me to this day. Back when I was 9 or so, me and my friend were having a sleepover. His parents were at a dinner, and his brother was out getting stoned somewhere. Anyway, it was probably 9 p.m. His parents had just called and said that dinner had turned into drinks and they would be out for a little while longer. Anyway, we were young, playing video games. When we heard his front door open, it made a very noticeable noise when it opened, very creaky, almost eerie. So, we thought, oh, it's probably just your brother. And kept playing, thinking nothing of it. Then we heard footsteps on the floor above us. We once again thought nothing of it, seeing as his kitchen was above the basement where we were playing games, and his brother was likely there for mid-high munchies. But then we heard another set of footsteps. We were confused at this point, but we didn't worry as it was either his parents or a stoner friend of his brother. We then heard a scratch at the basement door. We both looked at each other like, is that just me or is there scratching? He didn't have any pets, so, being the oldest by 2 months, I went to check. I opened the door, and there was nothing there. I yelled upstairs to his brother, let's call him Jim. Jim, you're not scaring us. Stop it. No reply. So I sat back down and continued playing. Now, there was scratching on the window. We were honestly terrified, and we stayed seated, one of us looking at the door, the other looking at the window. Then, again, scratching at the door. I opened it with a baseball bat in hand and nothing. We barricaded the door and put things in front of the window. We didn't hear anything for the next half an hour and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, his dad came down, knocked on the door, and tried to get into the basement. We took down the barricade, and his dad came into the room, furious. Why the hell did you guys rip open the screen door? We went upstairs, and sure enough, the front door's screen was shredded. We tried to convince him that it wasn't us and that the brother had done it to scare us. But what he said next made our blood run cold. Jim wasn't home at all last night. We dropped him off in the city with his friends. My friend's house was half an hour away from the city, and none of the people at his friend's house had cars. My friend and I looked at each other and couldn't speak. Needless to say, his parents didn't believe us. They called my parents, and me and my friend had to split the cost to have the basement door replaced. It had tons of scratch marks as well, and the screen door replaced. Me and my friend still bring this up to this day. Whenever we meet. In June 2016, my girlfriend and I were out camping near Sulphur, OK, at a campground called Chigger Hill. The name really should have been a red flag, but we were newly in love and idealistic, so we set up camp anyways, only to be rained out a little after 2 a.m. We packed up all our stuff in the middle of a downpour, got out before the road flooded, and started driving back to our apartment in Tulsa. It's close to 3 a.m. now, and we start looking for a gas station because she's got to pee and I want mini donuts. There's not a lot out there in central Oklahoma, But we finally found a gas station that had lights on. There was a white truck and another truck, I think it was red, parked outside, but no one was in them. We go inside, and my girlfriend immediately heads to the restroom while I start looking for snacks. It takes me a minute to notice, but there's no one else in the gas station. It's got those anti-theft mirrors up on the ceiling, like at Walgreens, so I can see the whole store, and it's empty. I figure the employee might be out having a smoke, so I keep looking for snacks, but all the food looks old. Not like, dusty old, but like, packaging I haven't seen since I was a kid. Now, everyone knows that you should never eat the food in Fairy, so I wait for my girlfriend to get out of the bathroom, and we decide to leave immediately. As we're walking to the door, though, a girl talks to us from behind the checkout counter, asking if we found everything alright. I have no idea where she came from because there were no other doors and she didn't come through the front door, so she startled the shit out of us. We left, chalking it up as a weird small town experience, and that would have been that. Here's the kicker, though, we drove out that way again about 6 months later and made a point of watching for this gas station. We passed through the same small town and the same intersection where we had been before, but there wasn't a gas station. There was never a gas station. That crossroads is regular, undisturbed cow pasture. All in all, I'm really glad I didn't eat any mini donuts from there. When I was 15, my family went on a cross-country trip, and one night we camped in the Grand Canyon. We went to a ranger lecture around 6 p.m., this is summer, so it was still pretty light when we were walking back. We went off the trail as a shortcut, and after walking a ways, we noticed a light up ahead. As we drew closer, there was a man sitting at a desk in the woods with a lantern. Just a full wood office-sized desk in the middle of the woods. I distinctly remember that he had long sideburns and felt like he was dressed like a man from the 1800s. My dad backed us down towards the trail, and we went on our way. The man never made a peep, looked up, or acknowledged us. There were 2 adults and 3 teenagers, and we all remember the event really clearly. I don't believe in ghosts or spirits, but I have no explanation for what I saw. As I got older, I figured I was misremembering, but everyone else in my family says they saw the same thing. It was 1984, I was 15 years old and was alone at my older sister's house. It was late morning, I had just gotten out of the shower, still wrapped in a towel, when I heard a noise outside. I looked out a window and watched a complete stranger tie the doorknob of the main entrance to the railing of the deck with a rope I used to walk the dog with. He then leaned a mop that was on the deck against the door. I called my sister, told her what happened, got dressed, got the heck out of the house through a different door, and hid in the bushes until the police arrived. The house was somewhat remote, with no close neighbors. I found out later that the door he tied up was unlocked. I had no clue how long he had been lurking around before I knew of his presence. To this day, we have no idea who that was or what his motives were. It was beyond creepy and definitely unexplained. I was having a sleepover at my friend's house when her dog woke me up. Nothing unusual, the dog jumped in the guest bed and smothered me until I got up. When I got up, I saw a black figure named Naruto run into the wall. I am not joking when I say that. She was wearing a dress and had really long hair. I told my friend about it, and we thought it was really cool and just thought it was me being tired. After we did some things, my friend told me to look out the window because she saw something. The bush outside was moving slightly, even though the bushes next to it were still, and you could faintly see another dark figure. But this one didn't have a dress or long hair. As I was leaving her house, we did see another Naruto run in the basement because that's where her garage is. I left her house, and she told me that once she saw another one in the shape of a dog. This isn't the creepy part. The creepy part is that 2 years later, she had another friend sleep at the house. This friend wasn't as into ghosts and creepy stuff as us, and we had already come to the conclusion that we were just little creeps who wanted a ghost story. But her other friend said that she woke up and saw a dark figure run into her room. We had never told the other friend that ghost story. A couple of summers ago, myself and some friends from university went to visit one of our friends' houses since we were going to a festival nearby and had been offered to stay over. Long story short, her family is extremely rich, with a huge old mansion in the English countryside. As with any home this big, we had a bit of a tour around and were shown our guest rooms. Her dad began to tell us that the place was haunted, in a joking tone, and mentioned that when they first moved there, a dresser had been left behind in one of the guest rooms, the one I was staying in. This was one of the only things left behind, and they'd found a lock of hair in one of the drawers. I'm not really a believer in ghost stories, so at the time I just shrugged it off as a joke, although it's still a bit weird, admittedly. That night, I got into bed and began to notice that the air felt strangely cold around me, but there wasn't a particular breeze. The rest of the house had been at a perfectly normal temperature just before this. As I slept, I kept having the most surreal dreams, nothing like when I'd normally sleep. I'd constantly awaken feeling cold. It was like when you're very unwell and find yourself somewhat hallucinating in bed while you dip in and out of sleep. The other weird thing was that this was the middle of August, and in the UK, we don't typically have air conditioning, not unless you're in an office or something. I woke up the next morning, and on one side of the room there are two hanging rails for clothes. The guest room is normally used for storing spare clothes. Several of the clothing items were on the floor, the hangers had completely come off the railings, and I could have sworn these were all hung up the night before. Like I say, I'm not really a believer in paranormal stuff, but that night has spooked me ever since. I've never experienced anything quite as strange. I do wonder if her dad's stories of it being haunted have planted a placebo in my head, though. A decade ago, a girlfriend, let's call her M, moved in with me, but she gave me a warning. There's a man that follows me, he's not evil or anything like that, but he doesn't like men. That should have been the time I noped the F out of my own home, but I was in love and just accepted her wild statement. Fast forward a few months later, home alone, M just left for work, and I'm showering. I hear the bathroom door open and hit the dresser behind it. I look to my right and see a shadow through the curtain. I jokingly say out loud, "Oh, you're back for some bonus shower time?" As I open the curtain, nobody is there, I am still home alone. A few days later, I come home from work, hang my keys on the hook like I always do, and walk away. An hour goes by when I notice my keys rocking back and forth on the hook. Minutes turn into hours as my keys keep rocking. Finally, M comes home and looks at me, looks at the keys, and asks, "How long?" I just stared at her as she stopped the keys, as if it were as common as the op not delivering on a locked safe. The two worst ones happen close together. Again, I'm in the bathroom, on my knees, as I scrub the tub. I feel as though someone is next to me, breathing on me. As I jerk away, a hand grabs my leg and yanks me towards the bathroom door, and then nothing. That night, I'm out with a group of friends. I'm telling them these same stories, and at the end, the light above us flickers and shuts off. As we all look up at the light, my chair gets picked up and thrown into the table. I turned around to scold the jackass behind me, but nobody was there. Everyone just stared at me with shocked looks on their faces because they had just witnessed the man. The finale. It's late, and M is downstairs in bed. I'm turning off the lights as I hear our laundry room door close and footsteps leading to the bedroom. My brain is thinking M is awake, so I go to the bedroom. I open the door to the sound of her softly snoring. I turn around and am hit with the loveliest smell I have ever experienced. It's the smell of my late Nana's home, her perfume is everywhere. After that moment, the man was gone. It's like she came into the home and removed his presence, I can't explain it. All I know is that I haven't smelled that scent in well over 20 years, and I doubt I'll ever smell it again. My mom was driving me and my brother to Legoland for his birthday. He was 6, and as it was a long journey, we stopped off at a diner to eat halfway through. It was a retro 40s style diner, and the staff seemed really dedicated to their roles. My brother runs upstairs to get a table and comes back down, tugging on my mom's arm, saying, "Mummy, Mummy. The soldier's playing." So after we order, we go upstairs, and sure enough, there's an elderly gentleman who's decked out in full World War I Army uniform who has a lovely conversation with us and lets my brother hold and look at his medals. Well, this is where the insane shit comes in. We bid the nice man goodbye and leave for Legoland. On the way back, we decide to stop off at the same place because the food and service were so good, and when we pull up to the building, the sign outside has changed. It's definitely the same diner, though, it's the only one on this stretch of road, and it has the same name, so we figure they must have done some renovations while we were away. And then we enter the diner, and the decorations have all been changed. It's a little odd, but it's definitely the same place, and it's reasonable for them to have redecorated. Then we go to the counter, and the staff are all different people. Again, it could be a coincidence, but when we speak to the woman serving us, she says she's been the only one working all day and that no redecorations have taken place. Confused, we press her on this, asking about the soldier we spoke to earlier, and she tells us that there have been no people in uniform visiting the diner today, and if they did, she would remember. Thoroughly spooked, we order food and go back upstairs, to the same table we sat at earlier that day, but seemingly in a different reality. I still have no explanation, and my mom is convinced we went through some sort of time portal.